Hi, welcome to Health Exchange. With us today is Blake Dinius. He is the entomologist for Plymouth County. Welcome to the show today, Blake. Thank you for coming.
Thank you so much for having me, Kim.
And we've been doing a series on vector-borne diseases, and you're coming in to speak to us about ticks today.
Yeah, of course. So even though we might be thinking about mosquitoes now with everything going on with EEE, what we do notice is that ticks still make up, in terms of number of cases, the majority of cases of vector-borne diseases that we see in America.
And can you inform us on the tick-borne viruses that are prevalent in our area?
So in the Northeast, we really only have one true virus, Powassan virus, but we do have a number of different other pathogens that we have. The deer tick can transmit Lyme disease, and everyone pretty much knows about Lyme disease. That's a bacteria. But there's also anaplasmosis, babesiosis, and this thing called relapsing fever. And so those are the diseases, and the agents that cause them are either bacteria or, in the case of babesiosis, a protozoan. And then you have an American dog tick, which is another tick. I grew up calling these wood ticks. Those ticks, I notice a lot of people say, like, don't worry about them, they're the bigger ticks. And while that is more or less a safe bet, it's not necessarily true, because the American dog tick can transmit both tularemia and Rocky Mountain spotted fever. We do have a third species of tick that I haven't seen here in Plymouth County yet, at least an established population, and that's the Lone Star tick. And that can transmit the two diseases that the American dog tick can transmit, so Rocky Mountain spotted fever and tularemia, but three other different diseases too. One called Stari, which we don't know too much about it yet, the alpha-gal allergy, or the red meat allergy, and then Ehrlichiosis, the true Ehrlichiosis. I know that anaplasmosis used to be labeled as Ehrlichiosis, but it's now reclassified.
So you mentioned the Lone Star tick, and I know watching the news and the larger media outlets, they have spoken about it. And just traveling and vacationing, and I know that the Cape and Barnstable County have spoken about it. When we're vacationing and traveling in different areas of the state of the Northeast, should we be concerned in taking precautions?
Of course. One of the things that we can keep in mind, though, is that while there are about 10 different pathogens here in the Northeast, 3 different species of ticks, that the things you do to protect yourself against the deer tick are going to work against all of the ticks. And so that's some really good peace of mind in case people are trying to get into their head, oh, do I remember this and this? And it just do the same thing to protect against deer tick, you're going to protect against Lone Star tick. The interesting thing about Lone Star tick that varies a little bit from deer tick is that this tick has very good vision, unlike a deer tick, which is basically blind, it has no eyes. This tick will actually move towards you and more or less hunt you down. Where we need to worry about Lone Star tick are going to be really anywhere south of Plymouth County. So you're looking at Barnstable County, Connecticut, New York, especially Long Island, the islands, so Nantucket, Dukes County. You want to look at those. We do see at least some individuals all the way up to the south of Maine. So it can be there. I'm not saying it's impossible. We're just looking at established populations. It's more or less south of Plymouth County. Bristol County, we've seen established populations as well.
And these are arthropods, much like in our other series we've spoken about, where once upon a time in history's past, we didn't feel they would ever become prevalent in the Northeast because of our harsh winters and other things. Does climate change play a role in the tick-borne diseases and the newer species we're starting to see work their way up from the south?
It's possible in the case of Lone Star tick that warming temperatures may play a role. I mean, this is a subtropical tick, and so we do see it pretty much in warmer areas. So I imagine that, you know, if climate change is something that you believe in, or that a warming climate would cause this tick to move further north. When it comes to things like the deer tick, I don't believe that climate change really plays much of a role. And then this new tick that we've been seeing in the news, the Asian longhorn tick, that tick is certainly not going to be impacted by any cold climates. It's really the only, what we were talking about, the only really species of tick that I would be concerned about when it came to warming temperatures, at least with human-borne diseases, would be the Lone Star tick.
Okay, and prevention. Personal responsibility. For us that may not know, what can we do at home to protect ourselves and our loved ones and our pets?
That's a really good question. When it comes to tick-borne disease, one of the questions I tend to get is, what are they going to do about it? And so they is almost always just not me, really. It's a bigger organization. It's either the government, mosquito control, researchers, doctors. But when it comes to protecting ourselves against tick-borne diseases, it's almost exclusively personal responsibility. It's what can I do? And that's the kind of message that I really want to get out, is that instead of waiting for other people to solve this problem, we need to take this issue into our own hands. And so I think personal protection is by far the most important aspect of preventing tick-borne disease. Some of the best things you can do are use EPA registered repellents. And these are repellents, if you look on the bottle of any repellent that you might find at Amazon, Dick's Sporting Goods, Target, Walmart, any major retail chains, just flip the bottle over, look on the back, it should say EPA Reg No and then a number. That means that this repellent has been tested for both safety and efficacy, that there are actual studies done and there are data on file that prove this. If it doesn't have that, then who knows? It could be a scam. It could be water in that bottle. It could be something that may harm you. There's no way that we would know.
And for those who may not know, when you refer to it could be water or other products or a scam, can you elaborate on the 25B products and the exemption without that EPA registered number?
So there's this thing called 25B exempt. And what this is that what the EPA has determined is that there are a certain number of products that, because they are derived from natural substances, don't require any testing for either safety or efficacy. And that's important that it's both. It's not just, will this be effective? It's also, is this safe to use? And so we don't know these things. And a lot of the data about these products really comes from academia now. It comes from people just deciding, hey, I want to test out this essential oil or this other all-natural ingredient, and that information comes through very slowly, and it can vary depending on who is manufacturing this. If it's something that has been thoroughly tested, then maybe it would work. But any deviation from that particular study, we don't know what it does. If the ingredients change, if the mixture of components change. And a lot of these products that are deemed 25B exempt are considered safe when used alone, but we actually have no idea what happens when you mix them all together. And so it's really this unknown territory. And what I really like to get across is that natural doesn't necessarily mean safe, and synthetic doesn't necessarily mean dangerous. It's what data do you have backing up each of these components.
That seems scary. Are there any products that are 25B that could possibly be out there that we could possibly be using because we feel natural or organic? Just it sounds good, so we just assume it may be safe, that we should really be considering how we're using it and what we're doing with it, and possibly second guessing ourselves because we don't have the knowledge.
So the question is, what products out there exist that are okay to use, that are 25B exempt?
Well, no, more so that we should be very concerned about, should we be concerned about cedar oil? Should we be concerned about tree oil? Should we be concerned about different things with large amounts of garlic in it? The message I would really just want to get across is that when it comes to these products,
We just don't know. I don't want to get too far into the specifics of which kinds are okay and which kinds aren't. There are certainly some that have shown some repellency and some efficacy. For instance, you might get about 30 to 40% repellency from some of these ingredients. But like I said, the bottom line is that we really just don't know. I know there are people out there that will just refuse to use anything synthetic, and my personal stance on that is I'd rather you use something than nothing. Okay. And so we've got triple E around here, we've got Lyme, it's very prevalent. We've got a lot of different risks that are out in the environment, and for someone to just say, I'm not going to use anything chemical, fine, I'm just going to wear nothing, I think is very dangerous. And if their only alternative is to use something that might not be as effective, I'd rather them use that instead.
Is there any repellents? I know that DPH has a list of 4 repellents that repel against mosquitoes, but those repellents, would they all be effective against repelling a tick?
That's a good question. So the way that ticks perceive their environment is very similar to the way that mosquitoes perceive their environment. Mosquitoes use antennae. Ticks use something called Howler's organs that are located on their front legs. And these are what the ticks essentially use to smell their environment. So they're going to pick up on all these different cues, anything from body heat to, as we're speaking, CO2 coming out of our mouth. And on a really hot day, there might be lactic acid in our sweat, body odors, a number of different chemical signals, right? And so these repellents essentially jam up those receptors. They kind of block them. The repellents that DPH recommends are DEET. Everyone knows about DEET. That's probably the oldest repellent around. Picaridin, something called IR3535. They also recommend oil of lemon eucalyptus and this thing called Bio-UD. So the data that I've seen on 3 of those repellents are in regards to black-legged ticks. So you've got DEET, picaridin, and IR3535. I've seen actual studies where those have been known to repel black-legged tick. The other 2 that are recommended for repelling mosquitoes, I've only really seen on either Lone Star tick or mosquitoes. I've never really, or they've been conducted on black-legged tick in a very tightly controlled laboratory assay where you have ticks on filter paper and you see which side they go to, basically. So do they repel ticks as well in the environment when used on skin? Probably, but I don't know for sure, really is the bottom line. If you're going to stick with something that we actually have seen some pretty good field studies using repellents, you've got DEET, picaridin, and IR3535, which is can be found in Avon Skin So Soft with Bug Guard. As far as I know, that's the only manufacturer that makes the IR3535. There could be others, but those 3 are the ones that I would stick with for now.
No, I've heard multiple rumors that when you use DEET, if you're using a percentage at 5% or 10% DEET, that it will not repel a tick. Is that true?
That's not true. So you are going to get some repellency at 5%. But the percentage, it scales up until you hit about 20%. It's right around that benchmark that you reach your maximum level of repellency. Once you get over that level, you don't really see too much of an effect. So if someone's using 100% DEET or 20% DEET, they're not repelling 5 times the number of mosquitoes or ticks. They may not repel any more than the 20%. And so when people are concerned about overexposure to some of these chemicals, or they don't want to use too much because they're worried about the safety or their health, I recommend that you would stick with about 20-25% for any of these compounds, with the exception of oil of lemon eucalyptus, where you want 30%. Or if you're going to use the Bio-UD, that only comes in 7.75%.
Okay, that is fantastic information, and I'm sure that many of our viewers weren't aware of those facts. Are there other ways that we can take personal responsibility to prevent ourselves? Is there certain clothing that we should use?
So one of the recommendations that I almost always see in newspapers is wear light-colored clothing. And I'll tell you this right now, I don't pay any attention to that. Well, light-colored clothing can allow you to see a tick better. What I would recommend in lieu of that is to actually treat your clothing with something called Permethrin or Permethrin, tomato. I've heard it pronounced either way by researchers. And this is something, it's not going to be the brand of the spray, it's actually going to be the active ingredient. So you want to pick up a bottle, look at the bottle, look for the active ingredient on it. What this does is this product will actually bind very tightly to your clothing, last for about 30 days or 6 washings, and it will actually kill ticks that contact your clothing. So when you walk through the woods, I know there's still this thing in the back of your mind, what if a tick still clings to me? Sure, then I'm going to have to do a tick check, but I don't even want to find a tick on my body. The permethrin works very, very well. In most studies, I see about 100% efficacy. Sometimes they're around 90, but in general, most of the studies, you're getting really close to 100% protection from ticks.
With permethrin, can you use it on anything other than clothing?
You can, but never skin. So you can use it on things like your tent. I actually use it on my backpack because I do a lot of hiking. I do a lot of fishing, camping, backpacking, and I am constantly setting my backpack on the ground. Now, something that smells like me, ticks, again, they're going to pick up on things like body odor, sweat. If you're doing a lot of hiking, that backpack is going to reek of sweat. And so treating that backpack with something like permethrin before you go out means that any ticks that cling to that are going to die. And then when you go and you put that backpack up on your shoulders, now those ticks don't have the easy way up to your skin, where you may not have treated this part of your body with either permethrin or repellents.
That is so great to know, and for me personally, it's just one more way of prevention.
Exactly. We're talking about layers. So none of these things, you can't put a guarantee on any of these. They're never 100%. Even though I just mentioned that permethrin, you get pretty close to it, there's still no stamp of approval. There's no guarantee. And you really want to stack different layers. So what I would recommend is shoes and socks at a minimum treated with permethrin. You might want to go higher up, especially this time of year. Adult deer ticks can be found about 2.5 feet up off the ground, so you think waist height. What I usually tell people is that Labor Day to Memorial Day, you want to think waist height and down. Memorial Day to Labor Day, you want to think ankle height and down. And so that's kind of a good way to remember where you're going to find ticks in your environment. But any exposed skin, people can wear shorts nowadays. Just make sure you're using one of those EPA registered repellents. We're talking about treating your skin with that. And then, of course, your upper body to ward off any mosquitoes.
That's fantastic. In our yards, with mosquitoes, we eliminate water. They're more active at different times. Mm-hmm. But the tick, just like the mosquito, is one bite, and there's that possibility that one tick bite can transmit a disease. What can we do on our own properties to possibly make the yard safer and not an environment the tick would enjoy to live in?
There are a number of different things you can do. So the deer tick, and I like to focus on the deer tick primarily because this one is the one that carries Lyme. None of the other ticks carry Lyme, and this particular tick is, at least right now, the most common in this county. This tick will feed on a number of different backyard animals. So you're looking at anything from chipmunks to squirrels to rabbits to robins, veery, grackle, white-footed mice, deer. Even though we call it the deer tick, it's kind of wild that people want to peg Bambi for this when it's really maybe Mickey Mouse or Chip and Dale, right?
Absolutely.
But what you want to do is the tick's also going to really want to exist in damp and shady. So anything in your yard that you think is going to harbor moisture, so rock walls, stacked logs, if you've got a lot of pachysandra covering your garden, those are areas that are going to harbor moisture. This particular tick, it dries out really, really quickly. If you bring that tick indoors this time of year, especially on a day like this, that tick's not going to live more than a weekend. And it's going to dry out very, very quickly unless it can find an area that it can absorb moisture from the air around it. And so within your yard, it's going to be looking for those pockets too. And so like I said, so some ground cover, things like that it's going to look for. But what is really important this time of year, where we've got a lot of falling leaves, the leaf accumulation is going to be a really good hiding spot for this particular tick. It's going to harbor a lot of moisture, and a recently published study actually brought up that these ticks actually require these leaves to survive the winter. So even though they naturally produce antifreeze in their body, they still require that extra buffer of leaves and snow cover to prevent them from freezing to death when in these cold winters.
So you just touched on winter and the deer tick having antifreeze in its body. So a lot of people, and I recently learned, it was a few years ago, not so recently, that ticks can overwinter.
They have to overwinter, actually.
So when you say they have to overwinter, can you elaborate on that?
They've got a long life cycle. They live for about 2 to 3 years, depending on species in this area. And so your deer tick lives for about 2 years. And so it has to overwinter either in the nymph stage or the adult stage is where it's primarily going to overwinter. And it is well equipped to survive freezing temperatures. I mean, we see deer tick in Canada, we see deer tick in Alaska. This tick is very hardy, very tolerant of the cold.
Now, will they look for blood meals during the winter, or are they a species that hibernates?
The American dog tick and the Lone Star tick actually go into they call it diapause, and this is, you can think of it like hibernation. And so this is where I think the concept of a tick season really came into play, because back in the 80s, the ticks kind of went away after the summer, and we were really thinking about deer tick. No, not deer tick, sorry, excuse me. We were really thinking about dog tick, because the dog tick kind of goes away as the temperatures get colder. What we see with the deer tick, on the other hand, is deer tick, like I said, remains active from about Labor Day to Memorial Day. Anytime temperatures are above 32 degrees, you can have deer tick activity. When you reach about 40 degrees, then it's super active. So between 32 and 40, it's a little bit sluggish, but you can still have bites. If the tick manages to cling to any passerby, and it's going to do so using claws, so it doesn't need to be particularly fast to grab. It's a little bit like Velcro. You brush up against it, and that claw is going to hook in. So it doesn't matter if it's too sluggish. You can still pick up a deer tick at 32, but from 32 to 40, it's a little on the slower side. You might encounter fewer of them. From 40 and up, now that's there's no real difference between 40 and then 80 degrees. You're going to have a very similar amount of deer tick activity. And this can happen, Christmas Day. It could happen New Year's Day. It could happen on Valentine's Day. Any time throughout the winter, you can have that tick activity.
So it'd be really important for those that ski and snowshoe and others, and particularly enjoy it when it's a little bit warmer and not freezing, to still take those personal precautions we are taking during those summer months.
It could be definitely important for those people. What I would recommend more so for when there isn't snow cover. So when we have a lot of dense snow cover, again, the ticks are still not going to be particularly common. They're going to be almost impossible to find when you have dense snow cover. It's when you have some of these warmer days where there's not a lot of snow cover, and you might have people doing hiking or really letting their dog out to go to the bathroom and letting their dog come back in, or going out for a walk because it's so nice. And when you see people wearing super short shorts in February, because now all of a sudden it got to be about 45 degrees and people all of a sudden think that's summer, that's really what the people that I would be concerned the most about.
So I'm definitely guilty, because I'm not in super short shorts in February, but if it's above 35, I am in my flip-flops in the backyard and trying to, enjoy myself and breathe.
And this is where we would find the biggest risk is the backyard, not necessarily the skiing, but the backyard flip-flop wearers or short wearers, or for me, walking around maybe barefoot in my pajama pants, right?
Right.
So that kind of thing.
So you particularly, want to do a tick check, ankles down, if you are one of those people. Even in the warmer weather. I would recommend
full body tick check, not even just ankles down, but complete full body. And looping back into some of this yard protection, what can you do to prevent ticks in your yard, right? So there's a few things that I would recommend doing. actually one thing that I would recommend doing in addition to, like I said, raking leaves, creating an environment where you're not harboring a lot of moisture, so cutting your grass, keeping your grass trimmed, not having a lot of overhanging trees, not a lot of dense shrubs. You can do a yard spray, and a lot of times what people don't realize is that not all yard sprays are created equally. Sometimes people say, I got my yard sprayed every year. Does that actually work? And then I ask them, what are they spraying in your yard? And they say, I don't know. Now, I want you to think of your yard a little bit like you might think of your body, right? You want to know what's being put in your body. You should know what's being sprayed in your yard as well. Ask whoever's spraying your yard, what is the active ingredient in that? And it should be, if you're really serious about preventing ticks in your yard, it should be a synthetic compound. It should be a pyrethrin. Again, these 25B products, they haven't really been shown to work in terms of yard sprays. We did have one that was on the market. It got reformulated and you can no longer purchase that one. The new updated formulation doesn't really work too much better than water. So if people are spraying something like an Essentia IC3, I hate to break it to you, you're kind of flushing your money down the toilet.
Well, I think that's important for the consumer to know. And the show's starting to come to an end.
Sure.
Is there anything that you would like to stress or repeat to the public that you feel is important and that they should really take home?
Absolutely. So we touched on a little of the tick protection, the yard protection, and I'm just going to cover really quickly, what do you do if you get bit by a tick? What do you do if all of this stuff failed, or if you're just not thinking, you didn't take me seriously? The best thing to do is to remove the tick properly. A pair of tweezers or some of those tick removal tools, they can also get the tick off. If you use tweezers, slow and steady, close to the skin, make sure you grab and pull straight up. If the mouth part breaks out, people call that the head. That's okay. That's a little bit like a splinter. It's not going to continually transmit infection. The key is to get the body of the tick off. Then you want to apply a little bit of antiseptic like Neosporin.
Okay.
Then you want to have that tick identified at the very minimum, because we know pathogens are specific to the type of tick. And then you can actually get that tick tested. If you get that tick tested, I'd recommend going through UMass Amherst, because their methods are published. They use, they're basically the best bang for your buck.
Okay.
And then if you get any rashes, take some photos of that. Everyone has a camera on their phone. Especially if the rash decides to change, show your doctor. Okay, the rash looked like this before, and now a week later, it's this big.
Okay. And would you be willing to come back on the show? I think that you are knowledgeable and just have that much more to share with us.
We really only hit like the very top, unfortunately. But yeah, I'd be happy to come back.
That's awesome. So we can look forward to Blake coming back to us, and thank you for watching the show, and we look forward to seeing you next time.